I just want to talk a little bit about, just very briefly, about what's going on in the sort of parapsychology, the psychology, the neuroscience, and scientific research. So I think what we've kind of always known this has existed because we've experienced it, and it's one of those sort of ineffable qualities. You can experience it, but how do you prove it, right? So part of it is science doesn't really have, even for scientists who are open to this, science is still sort of slow to develop the tools that are needed to measure it, but they are working with it. So there's a few interesting things going on. You know, the materialist idea was that science and extrasensory perception are completely incompatible. But now we are moving into that post-materialist stage where more and more scientists are realizing they're not incompatible at all. We just need to develop the tools to measure them. So there's a lot of fields like parapsychology, neuroscience, consciousness research, which is really interesting because consciousness research is coming to the conclusion that consciousness is not an emergent property of the brain, right? So the idea has always been the brain creates consciousness. But what we know is that's not true. If that were the truth, there'd be no possibility of mediumship, right? So we have always known that consciousness exists separately from the brain, but scientists are finding now ways to start measuring this, which is quite interesting. And sort of the prevailing sort of theory now is not that the brain creates consciousness, is that the brain is more like an antenna that's tuning in a drop of consciousness from this one stream that we're all part of, which is fascinating because all that means then is that when the antenna breaks, when the brain dies, the stream is still there. It's like a radio, you know, you can turn a knob, tune in a station, but if the knob breaks, the radio waves are still there, right? The brain more like that sort of antenna, like the radio knob, tuning in an aspect, the one single consciousness, the one mind, the superconscious, that then we identify that little droplet that we're tuning in as us, right? This is how we come to be. And so that when we sort of take away the idea that the brain creates consciousness, all of this opens up this whole world of extrasensory perception, of mediumship, of the near-death experiences. It actually makes way for all of this to happen. So the good thing here is that a lot of very credible scientists who are doing some really interesting work are stopping with the question of, is it real or not? And are starting with the assumption, it is real, so now how do we measure it?